Welcome back to Unirunner Video Drum Lessons for February 22nd, 2007. My name's Darren Mathis. Glad you could tune in. This week I'm going to read an email I received from Oli Milburn from Bristol, United Kingdom. Oli writes, "Hey Darren, I'm finding your podcast very useful and enjoy practicing with them. On in the background, I have a Roland electric drum kit and play through the earphones. So thanks for your hard work and keep it up. I have a question for you. I've been drumming for around 8 years now and consider myself experienced enough to listen to a beat and play it right back with no problems. With all the instruments I've learned over the years, I have never really mastered the art of reading music or tab and generally end up playing by ear, which is fine, but I think the next step for me is to advance in the right direction would be to learn to read drum score. Do you know an easy method for learning to read drum score, and could you explain it, please? Kind regards, Oli Milburn." Thanks a lot, Oli, for your email. And do I know an easy way? Not necessarily, but let's talk about reading drum music a little bit. And I'll go over just a few basics, and I'll introduce a few ideas that you may or may not be familiar with and how they relate to the drum set. And if you have questions about this, this will be a good opportunity to kind of be interactive and send me an email based on what I show you here today, or leave a comment at unirunner.com. It'll help me kind of, maybe I'll do another podcast after this as kind of follow up for any questions that people might have. But I want to basically introduce 3 types of notes that are good starting points when you're reading drum music. And I know Oli mentioned notation, drum notation, or drum score. So drums can be notated in a number of ways. I'm going to talk about kind of a standard notation, the same kind of notation you might see in a magazine like Modern Drummer, where there's a staff where you have 5 lines on your music, like this. So in this case, when you see drum music that's laid out like this on a staff, each line or space can represent one of your instruments on your drum kit. Like for instance, a lot of times this space here will represent your snare drum. So if you see a dot or if you see a note on that space, you know you're going to play the snare drum. Sometimes you might see a note down here. Guess what that might mean? Like bass drum. Sometimes you get a note up here. It might represent your ride cymbal. So in that way, it's very similar to a piano in that every line and space represents a different note. Same way with your drum set. Every line and space represents a different instrument on your drum kit. So that's pretty standard. A lot of music you'll see at the beginning of that staff, those 5 lines, a time signature. And for the most part, most rock music that you hear is going to be in the time signature of 4/4, which means there's 4 beats in a measure, and a quarter note represents 1 beat. So the quarter note is one of the 3 notes I'm going to talk about today. And the quarter note looks like this. So a quarter note gets 1 beat. So if you have a staff, those 5 lines going across, and you have a quarter note, you know you're going to play that note and it's going to get 1 beat. So if there are 4 beats in a measure, you can fit 4 of these in a measure. So you might see 4 of these on the snare drum line or the snare drum space. You would simply play it 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I want to talk about 2 more notes. And let me know if this is too basic or where you're at, because this is one of the things that's, as I mentioned, I don't know if there's a simple way to get introduced into drum music other than just to dive into it. But these 3 notes are good starting points. The quarter note, the next one is the 8th note. And you can tell an 8th note because it's going to have this flag on it, or it might have a beam that attaches it going across, that attaches it to another note. And the 8th note always is just going to have 1 beam or 1 flag. And so if you can fit 4 quarter notes in a measure of 4/4, guess how many 8th notes you can fit in 1 measure? That's right, 8 8th notes. So if you're playing quarter notes on the snare and kick drum, it would sound like this. If you're playing quarter notes, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4. So you play the first quarter note on the kick drum, the second quarter note on the snare drum, the third quarter note on the kick drum, and the fourth quarter note on the snare drum, it would be boom, cack, bass drum, snare, bass drum, snare, just like most rock music. 1, 2, 3, 4. So the eighth note is, you're going to be able to fit 8 notes in a measure rather than 4. And so that means it's played, so that means it's going to be twice as fast as a quarter note. So if your quarter notes in a measure are 1, 2, 3, 4, your eighth notes are counted 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And a lot of times you'll play the eighth notes in a simple rock beat on your ride cymbal or hi-hat. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So I'm going to draw all this out at the end here on a measure to show you how the quarter notes, eighth notes fit together. And I want to show you one more note here for today. It is the 16th note. So to turn an eighth note into a 16th note, all we have to do is add one flag to it like this. You might also see 16th notes that look like this, that are tied together. Just as you see, that would be a top one. Those are eighth notes because it's got one beam. You can make those eighth notes into 16th notes just by doing that. So anytime you see a note with 2 beams or 2 flags, it's a 16th note. Anytime you see a note with 1 flag or 1 beam, it's an eighth note. Anytime you see a note, as we started off, with no flags or no beams, it's a quarter note. So the 16th note, logically, it would make sense that you can get 16 of those in a measure. So we count 16th notes, 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E and a. So the quarter notes are counted 1, 2, 3, 4. Eighth notes are counted 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 16th notes are counted 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E and a. So you notice how I counted all 3 of those notes. The beat, or the 1, 2, 3, 4, stays in the same place. Like I mentioned before, if you look at a lot of drum notation, you might have 5 lines that represent your drum kit. And sometimes the line or the space that the bass drum will be on might vary. If you have 2 bass drums, they might put the one bass drum on the bottom space and the next bass drum on the line. But really, normally you'll see a key in a lot of drum set music, especially like in Modern Drummer, they'll put a little key what each space and line represents. But if you're going to only be playing a basic rock beat, you can actually represent the snare, hi-hat, and kick drum with just 3 lines. You can do this with 5 lines too, but for simplicity, I'm just going to draw 3 lines here. We're going to draw out a basic rock beat. So I'm going to play that basic rock beat here real quick. So for that basic rock beat, what I was playing on the hi-hat was eighth notes. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So I'm going to write that on the top line, which is our hi-hat line. So I wrote out those eighth notes on the top line. Now you're saying to yourself, whoa, hold on a second, you've got some strange looking note up here. It doesn't matter really what the note head or the main part of the note looks like. A lot of times in drum music you'll see the symbol notated as X's just so it stands out a bit. But you can tell these are eighth notes. Why? Because they've got one beam and they're separated. Lots of times they'll separate them into 2 groups of 4 like this. So this is 4 counts here. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So that's how you're going to count those, and that's what I was playing on the hi-hat. And they separate them into 2 groups like that a lot of times just for clarity's sake. You could actually just have one. They wouldn't necessarily have to be connected, but you know they're eighth notes because there's one beam. So that's the giveaway for eighth notes. Now on the kick drum, I was playing on 1 and 3. So I'm going to draw in quarter notes on the bottom line for 1 and 3. And now I just drew in some quarter notes down here, and you might see the stem or the long part of the note going down or up depending on its arrangement in the staff with various different types of notation, but I just happen to put it down this time. So you've got the quarter notes on 1 and 3. You see how they line up with the eighth notes at the top? You've got a 1 here, a 2 here, three here, and a 4 here. So you've got a, you can read my numbers, 1 there, so 1 and this is going to be the and here. Let me draw that in. So I've drawn in all the ands. So you've got on the eighth notes 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. You see how the quarter notes line up? I'm just going to draw a little line there. That quarter note's on the 1, this quarter note's on the 3. So that's where I was playing the kick drum. So now if we want to add in the snare, we'll put that on the middle line. And the snare was where? On 2 and 4. So that lines up with our eighth notes above. So I can put a note head there on the 2 and a note head, whoops, that's on 3 and here on the 4. And I'll just put this, mark down the stem that way too. So those are quarter notes. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you might have a repeat sign over here that tells you to repeat this measure, or you might see this same measure repeated over and over. But if you look in your various publications, drum magazines and whatnot, this will start to look familiar. Like I said, most of the time you're going to have more lines because maybe they'll add in some more lines, usually 5, just like a standard musical staff. And the various lines and spaces might be your toms. They might want you to hit a hi-hat. You might see a hi-hat down here even, notated like this. The key is just to look at that legend or the key on the music because it's going to vary from notation to notation or sheet music to sheet music, which staff or which lines and notes on this, or lines and spaces on the staff correspond to what instrument. Well, that's all we have time for today. Basically, didn't get to the 16th notes too much, but hopefully some of that looks familiar to you. If not, hopefully it might be clarified some of the ideas. Like I said, if you have any questions related to that, be sure to fire me off an email at info@unirunner.com or leave a comment at unirunner.com. Until next time, take care, keep practicing, and God bless.